landscape isn't changing very much and we're competing against Google Drive or whatever the free thing is in the productivity suite. But then Gen AI comes along and it's like the scoreboard reset, there's all these paths forward with the product. So that's really been the biggest source of motivation. If you're CEO, you're responsible for everything. But at the same time, what you want to do is like unfuse your identity from the company. I think it's super valuable to have a founding team. And so Arash and I had a pretty natural way of like splitting up responsibilities. I found all like the business stuff interesting, but he was relatively more focused on making sure the quality of the Dropbox product was good, making sure the culture within the company was good. But for a lot of other things, we could divide and conquer. One thing with all of the double-digit tenured founders is they do it for the love of the game. People are like, oh, what do you do for fun? Honestly, I like coding and prototyping. That's like what I spend more time doing other than family and work stuff because it's so interesting.
Welcome to Grit. I'm Joubin, partner at Kleiner Perkins, a show where we go beyond the highlight reel and explore the personal and professional challenges of building history-making companies. Today on the show, we have Drew Houston, CEO and co-founder of Dropbox. Drew wrote the first lines of code for Dropbox at a bus stop after forgetting his USB drive, and almost 20 years later, the story is legendary. Drew is part of an illustrious double-digit founder club here in Silicon Valley, and I suspect is going to be trying to chip away at this company for another 20 or so years. Enjoy the episode.
How big is Dropbox now?
We're about a little over 2,000 people.
Do people still, like, are you even allowed to sleep in the offices anymore? Like, is there like, has HR and compliance taken over? I'm being
no,
serious.
Totally. We're like 90% remote. So, and then Hack Week is a good example of the last 10% being really important, like getting everybody physically together.
Yeah.
But yeah, so therefore people are usually not sleeping in the office.
Okay. Are people remote for the Hack Week too?
We try to get people in person. Yeah. So in San Francisco, in Seattle, in Warsaw, in Poland, like we have people coming in. We want as many people to kind of get close to a hub as possible.
Yeah, that makes sense. How old are your kids? One kid too?
I have a almost 2-year-old named Charlie.
Congrats, man.
Yeah, thank you.
Have other things changed for you besides not being able to go all night and work? Like, has anything surprised you about having a kid and what it means to your job?
It's been overall really good and fun, and certainly being mostly remote lets you get those interstitial moments back. So between meetings, you can go say hi to Charlie or watch him crush a corn cob or, whatever he's up to.
Yeah.
He's in a big, like, bouncy ball and full moon loving phase of his life right now.
Yeah. I mean, obviously he's too young now, but do you, like, the world is changing basically since he's been born. Our world of technology has changed meaningfully.
Yeah.
I'm sure you've had the existential thoughts of like, what do I teach this kid?
Mm-hmm.
Like, what is this kid going to learn? Like, what is he going to go to school for? Have you had those questions in your mind?
They haven't loomed large again when he's still pretty, he's still on the early side. I mean, certainly wonder, I think, like everybody else, I wonder what, the role of humans will be, how that's going to evolve. That said, I think it'll take a longer for all of this to unfold than some of the timelines suggest. And
what do you mean?
Well, I think you hear people saying like singularity type things like, oh, well, coding will be completely solved this year. And then, or like, humans will just no longer have meaningful work in 10 years or things like that. It reminds me, I think, when like we were like, oh, self-driving cars are going to be here like any minute, 15 years ago.
Mm-hmm.
They do eventually get here, but it takes a lot longer for like the fully autonomous version of machine intelligence to materialize.
Mm-hmm.
So for example, like the idea for the self-driving car was in the early 2010s. Like people were like, oh my God, there's not going to be any human drivers on the road. And almost 15 years later, it's like, yeah, there are people in Waymos, but maybe thousands at any given moment.
Mm.
But when you think about automation, it's more of like a ladder. There even self-driving talks about this, like level 5 full autonomy. Before that, you have like level 1, 2, 3, 4. So before you get to like the car literally driving itself, you get things like Google Maps and you get things like highway assist and different steps towards that, which end up having a much bigger impact than full autonomy. And whenever there's new forms of automation, people's imaginations jump immediately to level 5. What really creates the most value in the near term is the level 1, level 2, level 3, like that progression. And trying to jump ahead too many steps is basically a form of being early, which is a form of being wrong.
Interesting.
Now, I mean, it depends on what time scale you're talking. I think we're certainly headed in that direction. I'm not, but I think there are also, and it's also not just the technology. Like our civilization there are other like limiting factors, like political or social limiting factors. Like no one wants humans to be like automated out of economic existence.
Right. And I wonder, in the self-driving example, if what it took to get from the building block that is now level 4 or 5 of self-driving now, can you port that over into what we're seeing, like the underlying technology? Can we get a head start into this new kind of maybe chat interface, like LLM version of the world? Like, do we get to speed run?
Oh, we're speed running that ladder climb with language models for sure.
Yeah.
So, and even grabbing onto that first rung of the ladder was pretty ridiculous when you think about
OpenAI's, you're saying GPT-3?
Yeah, GPT-3, GPT-2. When I started first really playing with a lot of machine learning myself, maybe back in, I studied computer science in undergrad, but I got into starting Dropbox and startups in general and didn't go to grad school, but I really wanted to learn AI and machine learning. So about 10 years ago, started playing with what we call like good old fashioned AI these days, like classifiers, regression, decision tree, like all these very basic techniques. And
they're like formerly known as like machine learning and deep learning.
Machine learning, yeah. Which is a lot more like applied statistics or just these foundational methods, which when you try to use them, I would write these scripts basically to try to automate parts, the more like annoying parts of my job. So for example, I'd write scripts to figure out where my time was going, or I'd write scripts to figure out which of my emails in my overflowing inbox, which of these things needed a response, or which were important, which were not important. And what you found pretty quickly is anytime you ran into text, the computer just couldn't understand it. And so there were whole fields of like natural language processing, but super primitive. Like the computer could sort of maybe identify the part of speech of a word in a sentence, but that was about it. And then suddenly with GPT-2, GPT-3, you had this thing that in one fell swoop, it could go from writing, it could go not just like identify part of speech or like sentiment, but could also like write a JavaScript program and then write a sonnet about the program and it would be really good. And so that was like a very big single leap where there was probably like, tons of advancements just packed into that large language model innovation. But you're seeing that progression of that ladder now, which is initially we started with these chatbots that were pretty transactional. You like ask a question, get an answer. And now as they have longer context and as they have tool use, and especially in coding workflows, you can see the agent will not just like write you a piece of code that you paste into your app, but will actually write the code, will write a test, it'll run the test, it'll identify a problem with the code it wrote. And then you have this closed loop that massively improves reliability. So that's definitely an example of speed running up the ladder towards full autonomy. But we're also finding that machine intelligence is jagged, is a phrase you hear a lot, which is meaning that it's uneven and that there's a complementarity between human and machine intelligence, where stuff that is really easy for humans is often really difficult for machines and vice versa. So a machine can tirelessly write like 1,000 lines of Python in one sitting in a minute. And yet when you look at the code, it'll make some like basic mistakes that, most humans would not. And then vice versa. So a 1-year-old or, Charlie, my 2-year-old son can like identify, it can perceive the world and learn from experience in a way that no large language model can.
Yeah.
And so what that means is, it actually doesn't matter if the machine or the human is deficient in some area, because it can be you can compensate. And what you really want is the union of the two. And so, and you saw this in the progression of things like chess, where initially there were just humans, and then but then when human plus computer could beat expert human, and eventually got to the point where like autonomous machine could beat everything. But I think we're going to have a pretty extended intermediate period where it's the human plus the machine, where each can compensate for the other's weaknesses. And it's more of an augmentation story than a replacement story.
When you hear the like agentic stuff being thrown around, my interpretation of it is that there's a intonation of autonomy when you say agents. Like the agents are running around doing things on behalf of people. And so your version of the world is like, well, if the agents are truly autonomous, we're probably much further away from agents than we believe we are. If the agents are meant to be an assistant to a human, then okay, I could buy that maybe we're closer to that future. Is that a fair?
Well, I'd say a couple things. So one, your job at work is actually a basket of many different kinds of tasks, right? So, in my work, I do all kinds of different things, and some of which are easier to help with AI than others. So, a lot of human relational tasks, or like spending time with someone, or relating to one of my direct reports or something, or speaking in front of the company. Those are pretty hard. It's pretty hard to get AI to do that, because of like the human element. And yet a lot of the more routine parts of my job, like, drafting emails or writing, like these things can be assisted more by AI. However, for most jobs where you have a basket, you can imagine it as kind of like a basket of lots of different colored balls, like a red ball, blue ball, green ball, purple ball. If AI can automate the green ball and the purple ball, and then the bag gets lighter, the next thing that's going to happen is you're just going to get more of the other kinds of balls poured in.
Totally. I agree
with
that.
It'll be like a reshaping. I think more than like wholesale automation of people's jobs.
My buddy just joined a call center automation AI company. He called me and he's like 4 weeks in, and he was like, "Dude, I can't believe what I'm seeing." Like he's just like now getting immersed in this world, and he's like, "I think I'm going to lose my job." Like he's a sales rep, and he's like, "Should I like start thinking about like what my next career move is? Like, what's left? Like real estate? Like what are we? And I'm like, look, I actually think sales is maybe one of the last to go, and specifically in this basket of things that you do. Like I told him, like I think you do a bunch of things that you absolutely should not be doing and hate doing. But if you're competing with a CX automation company and they have a sales rep that's on site with the customer and you guys don't, who do you think is going to win that deal?
Yeah.
So maybe that's where the calories should be spent, not the other basket of things that you absolutely do not and should not be doing.
Yeah. And if you're a salesperson and a big part of your job or the hours in your day are spent like drafting and editing cold emails, or just these like routine toil, and the other part of your job is actually like talking to humans in real life, then I think there's a lot of jobs like that where it'll be like the part you actually enjoy that's value added and hard to automate becomes you spend most of your time doing that. And the parts of your job you hate and are repetitive and boring, the machine can do for you. So I think that's in aggregate a good thing. Now, that said, companies will also, I think there's a lot of talking past each other where companies are also going to decide, be like, okay, now that if what used to take 10 people now takes 5 because you actually are getting more output. Some companies are going to be like, okay, we're going to now only have 5 people. And a lot of others will be like, well, we're just going to get 20 people worth of output out of these 10 people. And so depending on the company and the situation, they'll make different choices. But I think at the end of the day, For a long time, whenever there's been new automation, there's like a panic, and there's also this, economists call it this like lump of labor fallacy, where there's only a fixed amount of work in the world.
Right.
But what we find is that we net create jobs and things to do, or we never like run out of satisfaction or potential things for people to do. I think some things really are different this time, where it's like if you have like all these entry level jobs that consist of like doing the same task over and over again, then automation will hit kind of all of them at the same time. And I think it is dangerous if the sort of like cognitive waterline to be able to, participate economically and make a good living, especially in an entry level job. If that keeps going up, then I think that that displacement can happen a lot faster than the new jobs are invented. And I think that's what everybody's worried about.
Yeah.
So I'm not saying there's like, it'll all be good and, there won't be any negative consequences. But I do think, for the most part, companies, if they can spend more money on a human to make more money from their customers, they will do that.
Mm-hmm.
And so they'll benefit, both the company and the customer will benefit from automation and the efficiency. But I think a lot of companies will continue to be like, okay, well, we'll just continue hiring people and putting them to use because we have all these ideas of how we can make more revenue from our customers by doing this thing that we couldn't afford to do before.
Mm-hmm. Can you remind me, did you drop out of MIT?
No, I got
You actually graduated.
I took a leave to start my first company during school. So I took a year off. But I was like, my parents are going to kill me if I...
The SAT company?
Yeah, my online SAT prep company.
And you actually, like, no one takes a leave and then actually goes back to school.
I did. Yeah, it was tough. But I was like, yeah, my parents are going to kill me if I don't graduate.
Seriously?
My co-founder dropped out. So we do have that box checked as a founding team.
I mean, otherwise it's not even a legitimate company, is it?
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. Let me ask you this. If it was a ripping SAT company, or if it wasn't an SAT prep company and was, and it was Dropbox at the time, would you have still
come back? Maybe not. But I think...
And just dealt with your parents afterwards?
Yeah. But I think like dropping out, I mean, my view was you get like 4 years of your life to do college and then like 40 or 50 years to do your career or real life. And so like, why would you cut your college experience by like 25 or 50% by dropping out to get like 2% or 4% more career, like more work? And so I always like, I loved college. I thought it was like a really interesting and unique time where you can actually explore a lot of stuff that you can't once you're in the real world. But I think people that drop out, who end up dropping out, more often than not, it's because your company is like pulling you out. It's not like some like badge of honor that you try to pursue.
Yeah. Did the SAT prep company work?
Not really. It was good training wheels for everything else. But I think the biggest issue...
And you got like a perfect score on your SAT, I imagine?
I did.
Yeah.
Well, I was like, I'm like, that was a lot of work. I'm like, how can I like monetize this? And, it is this like thread of automation and personal frustration that's like threaded through my entrepreneurial life.
There you go.
So I started the SAT prep company. Well, the precursor to that was actually studying for the SAT. And I found that the language part or the verbal part is the hard part about it is mostly just the vocabulary, like these hard SAT words that you like learn for the SAT and never use again. And so the way you would usually study for that is by making these like paper flashcards. And I'm like, I can't like bring myself to deal with the tedium of that. And so I wrote a little like mini app, when I was 15 or 16 or whatever, to drill the vocab, and the app would remember which words I got right and wrong, and it's sort of this like adaptive learning thing. And I was like, that was super helpful. And then I memorized all the vocabulary, and then that was like the hard part of the SAT. And then, but I sort of like used that tool and then kind of threw it away because I'm like, what other use am I going to have for that afterwards? Yeah. But then the SAT changed in 2005 from being at a 1,600 points to 2,400, and then that kind of made all the existing books and everything obsolete. And we had this idea that like, instead of putting kids into classrooms at 8 a.m. on Saturday to hear from an 18-year-old who's just reading out of a book, there's a better way to do this. We could like reach a lot more people with an online class. And I mean, this is all commonplace now, but that was the idea. But the bigger issue was more like I got kind of burned out of like writing math questions about parallel lines and the train leaving Memphis at 4:41. Like I'm just like, I don't know if I can really do this for that long.
And so you took a leave to do that.
Yeah.
And how long were you on leave for?
About a year.
A year.
Yeah.
It's pretty good.
Yeah.
And then,
I mean, I kept working on it. So I came back because I only had maybe a year left. And so I was able to keep, and the SAT is also seasonal. So like, people aren't taking the SAT all year round. There's a fall and spring season. So it was a little easier to finish up at school.
And then what? You just let it kind of drift off into the wind?
Well, I started getting kind of bored. I had friends who were doing Y Combinator, and I was living in Boston at the time, had other friends living in Boston, and then a couple friends of mine actually moved out to California and raised millions of dollars in venture funding, and I was sort of stuck at home.
Doing an SAT
Yeah, doing an SAT prep company, like eating, mall food court sushi.
Were
Yeah,
you're like living out the dream that you wanted.
Exactly. I was sort of like left behind. And so I sort of started procrastinating on these little side projects. One was like a poker bot. So I figured out how to break the security on things like Party Poker and wire up an AI so that it would play poker with real money. But it was like buggy. So basically it was like an automated way of like having bugs that would just lose your money for you. But that too, I was like, I don't know. At the end of the day, this is just sort of like preying on unsuspecting people online, and probably not what I want to do either. But then that's how the way Dropbox started was while I was working on that company, all of the company's crown jewels were on this little thumb drive that I kept forgetting. And then it was this bus ride from Boston to New York where naturally I forgot my thumb drive, so I couldn't get any work done. And I was super frustrated with myself for being absent-minded or whatever. And I'm like, I just never want to have this problem again. And so this is 2006, going from Boston to New York, and there's like no Wi-Fi on the bus. This was before the iPhone. So I had a bunch of time. I just started writing some Python code, really for myself, having no idea what that seed would become.
And at that point, when you're writing a Python code for what eventually became Dropbox, did you think this was your golden ticket to California and Y Combinator? Honestly.
Yeah, it sort of seemed like it seemed like a good candidate.
Better than your poker bot.
Yeah. Where and while that bus ride was the moment where I'm like, I'm going to do something about this. That wasn't the first time I'd had that problem. I like, if it wasn't forgetting it at home, it was like, leaving a thumb drive in my pocket and putting it through the washing machine. There's always like one, I was like, how am I always living like one, like bad step away from like disaster for my company? And why does it work like this? Why does it work like this? So, and then it's a really interesting technical problem. Like, how do you basically, it didn't take much of a leap to think about, all right, well, if I'm going to relocate basically all of my files into the cloud, or at least like onto a server that I was paying for renting, if you have, it's not that hard to imagine like, oh, well, actually everybody needs something like this. Like, what would it look like to keep everybody's information in the cloud instead of just on their computers or on their phones? And my favorite classes were in things like distributed systems and algorithms at MIT. So like, so I was very like passionate about this, and I was like, yeah, this is a much better fit for me than like, writing SAT questions.
And at that point, were you the only one coalescing around this problem of trying to figure out how to get files in the cloud, even at that point?
No, actually, that was part of the issue. There were a lot of other companies that claimed to do online storage or syncing, but they weren't reliable. And I knew they weren't reliable because I would like try all of them. And there were things like folder share and lots of other companies. Like online storage was kind of the startup cliche of 2006, the way that like photo sharing became that, or similar AI things like that now. But when I would like look at these products, I'd try them, but I would go into the support forums and just sort of see like, does this thing work? And you'd find it was sort of like visiting like a battlefield medical tent when you go into these forums and read these horrible stories about people like, hey, I like my wedding photos disappeared or my tax returns disappeared, you know. And a lot of these products would just fall over from an engineering perspective. Like, oh, what if you put in something in the file name that has like a non-English character into it? Like a lot of these things would crash, or they wouldn't give you good visual feedback as to what's going on. And so I'm just like, I can't trust these things with like my most important information. So part of it was just born out of necessity and personal frustration.
When you saw your friends going out and raising money and doing Y Combinator, you all are smart MIT guys, like fine. But like, did you have when you saw them doing that and you were doing your thing, did you ever feel like maybe I'm just not that guy? Maybe I'm not as good as I thought I was?
I think not so much. It was actually funny. It's like, well, no, these are like my classmates. I know if they can do it, I can definitely do it. But there was, but I'd say there's certainly like insecurity in other forms. So for example, so before Dropbox, I started that SAT prep company. I also was like an intern at different startups. So I'd, been involved with probably half a dozen startups before Dropbox. But what I didn't know is if I should be CEO, because the more I learned about business, the more I realized I didn't know. And I was concerned, like maybe I should find like a more business-minded co-founder, and maybe I should be the CTO. And I remember asking the CEO of the startup where I worked, a company called Bit9, and I was like, should I be more the technical founder or should I try to be CEO? And he's like, look, just like give it a shot. And, it doesn't have to be permanent. If you like it, you can keep going. If you don't have to. So it's very practical. But I think, it's pretty common. I think it's like totally rational to have imposter syndrome, especially if you're in your early 20s and recognizing that like there's a whole world of stuff you need to know beyond the technology and beyond the product. And I wasn't fully aware then that all of that is like learnable or trainable.
Or that really nobody actually knows what they're doing.
Well, that was the argument that eventually made a lot of sense to me, which is that like, no one's born a CEO. Everybody's a first-time CEO at some point. Most of the founders of tech companies that, in the Hall of Fame that we all look at, they all started as technologists and learned the business side on the job. There's very few examples of going the other way. It's just like part of the game. So that like gave me some comfort later on. Maybe I wish I'd heard that like at the beginning. But no one's born a great CEO. It's completely trained. I mean, you have talents that can make parts of it easier or harder. But I think that basic fact that so many people have to learn, everybody's a first-time CEO by definition at some point, and then they have to learn on the job. That helped alleviate some of those concerns.
Yeah. And so you start hacking away on Dropbox. You reach out to Paul Graham.
Yeah.
You reach out to Y Combinator.
Yeah.
And you're like, hey, I have these shitty friends that I know what grades they're getting in school. If you let them in, like, are you kidding me?
Yeah. Funnily enough, I applied to the first batch of Y Combinator in 2005.
The one that Sam was in.
That one Sam was in. The Reddit guys were in, others, and got rejected. And I think made sense.
What'd you apply with? The SAT
the
company?
SAT prep company, yeah.
Yeah.
And then, but I became friends with all these people. So I had, friends in the 2005, 2006 batch, and saw how much fun they were having. They all like moved out to California. Everybody's living in this one building we called the Y Scraper. So there's like this like startup dorm in North Beach in SF. And I would visit there and I'd be like, man, these guys are just in like a way faster lane than I am, just like bootstrapping this thing by myself at home. And, but at the same time, like Y Combinator is like super competitive even back then.
Even then.
Yeah. And I mean, the one good thing about the SAT prep thing is like you sort of immerse yourself in the world of college admissions, which is a problem with a pretty similar shape. It's like you have 1 million applicants, not a lot of slots. How do you stand out? And what I decided was like, well, I really need a hook. And going in the front door is pretty difficult. Is there some kind of like, not back door, but side door? Like, is there some way I can get attention? And I'd read this book called Guerrilla Marketing, which is about like, how do you get users for your service if you have no money? And there are a lot of these like viral tactics, and some of these precursor tactics were in there. I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to make a video of Dropbox. I'm going to put it on Hacker News, or I'm going to work back and forth. Like, what does Paul Graham do all day? He probably just like refreshes Hacker News like everybody else, Y Combinator's news site. And so I'm like, all right, if I get Dropbox onto Hacker News, then maybe I'll have a leg up over other people. And that's actually what happened. I made this little demo video of Dropbox. It stayed at the top of Hacker News for 2 days. That gave me a lot of conviction to like quit my job and also put the SAT prep thing on hold and really go all in. Sure enough, Paul emailed me on day 2. He's like, this is pretty interesting, but you need a co-founder, which has sort of created a new problem, because I'm like, all right, Y Combinator was understandably like pretty against single founders. But getting that email is like, I know you're not dating anyone, but you need to be married in the next 2 weeks when the application deadline's done.
Yeah.
And so that started off this mad dash to find my co-founder. Fortunately, it worked out. I talked to Kyle Vogt, who was living in the Y Scraper. He started Twitch, or he started Justin TV, which kind of morphed into Twitch. And then Kyle also started Cruise, the self-driving car company. And Kyle had this friend who lived on the same floor, the same dorm in East Campus, named Arash, and then he introduced the two of us, and that's how we really got started.
So Arash checked the box of dropping out.
Yeah, and then it was funny because we were like, Arash was about to start his senior year, or maybe he had a semester left, but he had the same kind of cabin fever, sitting, in his dorm doing problems.
And you figured this out in a meeting?
Yeah, that was the weird thing about it. We met in the student center. Arash and I met in the student center, spent a couple hours together. I was expecting, and it was like very clear, like the timing was like he would have to drop out of school he couldn't do both school and Y Combinator at the same time. And I was expecting to have to like call his parents or convince them that this isn't as sketchy as it looks. But to his credit, he just like, all right, yeah, cool. He just, dropped out of school the next week and threw in full time, and we rented some bad office space. And
you were like, all right, fine, whatever. Like, this is a co-founder.
Yeah.
Whatever. So be it. So be it. If this is what gets me into Y Combinator, then so be it.
Yeah. I got lucky. I mean, usually these co-founder stories start with like, well, we grew up playing t-ball together and whatever. This was not like that. We like did not know each other. But there were signals. I mean, Kyle's endorsement. And then I was also looking through people who had either been like finalists or had won. There's like this MIT programming competition every winter. And Arash had been involved in that. And that was like really good.
What's the program?
It's this competition called Battle Code, where it's basically AI. You write AI that plays a game like StarCraft, and then you compete to see who has the best AI. And I had done it. Arash had been an organizer of it, so that was like a good recruiting territory.
Can you like steelman the other side for me now that you've done I have a co-founder. I've done this for 15 years with a co-founder. I don't think Arash is still like actively participating in the business day to day.
Yeah, so we're 18 years in now, and we were together for like 13 of them. So he left before.
You've been doing this for 18 years? Oh my God.
So I'm like 500 years old in Y Combinator founder years. Yeah.
And so, all right, like you just happened to work out with Arash for as long as it did.
It was awesome. Like I got super lucky.
And like the obviously conventional wisdom, which is also YC's wisdom around like being able to counterbalance the ebbs and flows of startups makes sense on paper. Like, it makes sense when you hear it. But like maybe still be on the other side for me. Like now you're doing it alone. Now you're at it alone. Like the company is not existential in the sense that it probably is not going to just die all of a sudden, but it still probably doesn't feel any easier. You probably still feel a lot of the same emotions. I'm just curious, like, how does that feel now?
Yeah, I wouldn't change anything about the path we were on. I think certainly if you're,
Like when you meet young founders now, are you like, go get a co-founder?
yeah, totally.
Same thing.
I mean, usually there's a co-founder that stays with the company for longer, or one that's CEO, or, they're pretty natural dynamics that tend to happen. But I think it's super valuable to have a founding team, not just a single founder. Or empirically, like those companies do better. I mean, I think if you've like have a lot of experience, certainly the learning curve does flatten out. You don't need as much offsetting. So I think, there's the calculus changes depending on where you are in your learning curve. But I think it's also just more fun, like toiling by yourself. Certainly, in like when you're at the zero stage, like it's neither fun nor effective. I think there's also just an aspect of it. You just need more throughput. And you need to be able to divide and conquer. And so Arash and I had a pretty natural way of like splitting up first the technical responsibilities. And then I found all like the business stuff interesting, and like, going to do fundraising, and going to hire an accountant and a lawyer, and like trying to figure out the marketing. And like, I found all that to be like new puzzles to solve. And Arash was Arash cared about that stuff too, but he was relatively more focused on making sure the quality of the Dropbox product was good, making sure the culture within the company is good. And he was more like internally focused. And so, and at the same time, we had areas where we overlapped, like as far as the big questions, like what do we want to do with the company? What do we want the culture to be like? What's our orientation toward, what do we want the outcome of the company to be? Like we were very aligned on those things, but for a lot of other things we could divide and conquer.
I still can't believe this. You've been the CEO for 18 years.
Yeah. There's been a lot of different chapters of it.
Has anyone who has outlasted you? Zuck?
Yep. There's not.
Is that why he put you on the board? Because he's like, all right, us. He's like, all right, Drew, us grandpas in technology, you got to stick together here. So let's.
I mean, there are people. Michael Dell has been at it for 40 or.
Yeah, I mean, look, like Allison.
Allison,
this is
totally.
like. It
thins out. Yeah, your graduating class. The reunions get smaller. Totally.
And I'm curious now, like, I don't know if do you feel lonely? Like, do you feel any of the emotions that you thought you would feel if you didn't have a co-founder in the beginning?
No, I think, I have a great team. So you're always working with, there's thousands of people who work at the company. So,
yeah, but you can't rely on them for some things.
Yeah. But you have other, but I think it's also true. There's a community of, all the founders with like double digit kind of tenure. We all hang out and compare war stories. And actually, in a lot of ways, it's the being CEO part more than the co-founder part that can be isolating. Or meaning like even your co-founder might not fully internalize what it means to have the responsibility of being CEO.
Like when you sit with your, let's call it the double digit crew.
Yeah.
Okay. I would love to be a fly on the wall for those.
Yeah.
In the double digit crew, when you have dinner and it's all the CEOs that are all hanging out, what are the general things that people are like lamenting about?
I think some of the evergreen topics are like, our company's so big, it's so inefficient. What are these people doing? It's a lot of bitching like that you'd expect.
Yeah.
Certainly a lot of trading notes and war stories, and like, what have you done that's been working? How do you get AI really infused into your company? So there's always like topical stuff. How do you navigate the whole geopolitical environment and the vibe shift there, and et cetera, et cetera. So I think there's a mix of like, topical things, but then mostly just like, how do you like organize your working life and be productive, and how do you like optimize your company, and how do you deal with different forms of competition. And so it's
in the how do you organize your working life question, can you put a finer point on that? Like, how do you think about that question, or like how is that question presented?
Well, I like to ask those guys, like, what's something you've done in the last year that you wish you had done 10 years ago, for example. Some is pretty tactical. Like, all right, how do you run your management team? Do you do one-on-ones or not? So like craft oriented discussions. I think some of the bigger elements for me were recognizing there's this pretty common arc of you start your company, you professionalize it, you start bringing in execs from other companies, you start like very in the details, and then, you are told and coached to be like, hey, like back off the details, let go a little bit, and then you let go too much, and then the company starts going off the rails, and you're like, wait, this isn't the company I wanted to start. Like you flip the table over, really lean in and be more directive and commanding. Brian Chesky is one of these double-digit founders, and I think founder mode speaks to this whole evolution. And I think that there are a lot of conversations around that. So I think there's definitely a lot of common patterns in just the learning curve. Over time.
What are some of the tactical ones that came up? I'm really curious. Like, what are some of the ones that people were like, I wish I did this 10 years ago? Or you?
Well, I think a lot of those founder mode type, that whole topic has been pretty animated over the last few years. So things like, you're just at some point you're far enough up the learning curve, and where you really do have you've sort of like tuned your own model as far as like what to pay attention to and your instincts. And so being a lot more like directive and assertive makes sense. I think the lesson would be like at some point, you don't have to like negotiate or compromise all the time. And if you really want your company the culture to be a certain way or the product to be a certain way, you can have these sort of limiting beliefs, or be too accommodating or be too consensus oriented. And, I found that had been the case at Dropbox. I think one of the it's been 18 years, but I'd say there's probably been like 3 chapters to the company. First was crazy hypergrowth fever dream, which was really fun, really stressful. But then I think we had this sort of middle period, 2015 to 2021, 22, where, we're sort of like cleaning up a lot of the problems of success, where it's easy for the company to get kind of complacent. We professionalized the company, brought in a lot of experienced management, scaled it up, became a lot more profitable and scaled. And so I think being with that group helped to really crystallize for me, like, I have to like really step into a new role.
Watching your own company become bureaucratic and slow.
Yeah, it's painful.
Must feel horrible.
Yeah.
And feeling like you have no recourse. And do you think that recourse feeling was more of like you don't have permission? Or do you think deep down maybe it was like you don't have the energy? Like 12 years later, you know what it's going to take to go as deep as you need?
I think there are aspects of both. I think certainly one in the like middle period, there are actually a lot of challenges pile up. But, you're scaling the company. It's, that's a messy process, even if you do it super well. In fact, if it's not messy, you're probably not scaling fast enough. And then if you build something successful, the faster it succeeds is the more intense the competitive response, right? And so with Dropbox, we were, we start this company, we were like, life would be better if our stuff was in the cloud. Product takes on a life of its own. Next thing we know, several years later, we're competing against pretty much every major internet company is coming after us in some form. And one benefit we had in the early days was like Dropbox is so general, it's so horizontal. It's like, what's Dropbox for? It's like, what's a computer for? What's a phone for? And so that meant like pretty much anyone with an internet connection was part of our target audience. But more and more we were experiencing like the negative flip side of that, which is that in a lot of ways we were just fighting this 10 front war against 10 different sets of competitors.
Microsoft and Google.
Right. Because we're as far as like the basic storage, on the basic storage side, we're like competing with the operating system and the device, right? If you buy an iPhone and unbox it, you're not going to see like, back up your stuff on Dropbox. Like, okay, we're competing with the iPhone to back up your iPhone. How's that going to go? Then you're like, okay, and look over to consumer use cases like photo sharing. It's like, well, in there we're fighting against Google, Apple, but also like Facebook, Snap, Instagram, that whole cast of characters. And then, in productivity, we're fighting against Microsoft and Google. And so just the list went, I'm like, sitting there in 2015, 2016 being like, oh my God, like it's more that all these things came together at the same time. So some of the, wear and tear of just like running this, of just being sprinting for, 8 years, plus it being a lot more competitive, plus noticing that like, wait, as my company's got, this is bizarre. I'm like, my company is like 1,000 people at that point. And I'm like, and we're skimming off the top in terms of talent. Like we're like poaching people from like the exec team at Google. And yet I'm like, the people we're getting are so smart, but sometimes the things we do as a company are so stupid. That just fascinated me, like the dysfunction that sets in as you scale. And then also at some point, starting a company can be a very linear process in terms of like milestones, not unlike like getting into college and going through college. It's like, all right, well, I'm in high school, I got to get these test scores, and in college I want. Okay, I'm going to get into I'm in college. I'm going to get whatever credentials I need to get the job that I want. And then startups are kind of like that. It's like, well, I need an idea, then I need to get into Y Combinator. Okay, after I get Y Combinator, I need to get venture money. After that, I need this valuation. I need this money, blah, blah, blah. And it's just like, but at some point, the numbers were big. It were sort of like, I'd gotten the merit badges that like collected whatever merit badges I wanted to collect. And at some point, I'm just like, this is just like big numbers getting bigger. Like what am I doing here? And so I think there was a part in that middle inning or the middle chapter where it's like, I had to really reconnect to a new sense of purpose, which I hadn't had to do in a while. And I was like, okay, this is really competitive. It's really challenging. It's pretty scary compared to the beginning because like now you actually have something to lose. And all these people their livelihoods depending on you. And like, your company's in like some pretty choppy waters strategically. And so I started to ask myself, I'm like, man, why does Dropbox need to exist? Because like all these other companies are basically like copying Dropbox. They're like copy, bundle, kill. They like clone the product, they bundle it with their platforms, and they make it free or destroy the economics. Like that's the incumbent response. And I'm like, that's sort of like playing chess against an opponent that has like 8 queens in the back. And you're like, this game kind of sucks. Mm-hmm. And so I was like, all right, what do I do about that? And part of it was like reconnecting to purpose. Like, why does Dropbox need to exist? And I was like, maybe we did it. Like the files are in sync now. Like I'm actually, this company doesn't need to live forever. Maybe I should go what other founders do in my position, like the tech bro ascendancy. Like maybe I should do flying cars. Maybe I should do space. Maybe I should do climate, whatever. And then I talked to people who are actually working on those things. So I actually interviewed a engineering director from SpaceX. And I was like, oh my God, it's so cool. You guys are like actually going to Mars. Like, how do you guys work together? How do you collaborate? And he's like, what? I don't really understand the question. I'm like, well, I don't know. Like, what's it going to take to put someone on Mars? And the answer was basically a lot of emails and a lot of files. And I was like, oh God. And then that sort of crystallized for me that I was like, well, we think of technology as this like amplifier, which it is. But when you look at it from the other direction, it's kind of a limiting factor. Like we can only be as good as our tools. And across everything that Dropbox was doing, like a lot of the problems were becoming solved. Like sync was kind of becoming solved. Like photo sharing was becoming solved. But in productivity, I felt like something was pretty wrong. Where even my own experience, like what was life like as a CEO? I don't know. It was like meetings all day, emails all night, sleep, repeat. I'm like, is this it? First world problem. But I'm like, this is weird because like my brain is just like stuck in first gear. Like I'm very busy, but I feel like the harder I'm pedaling, I'm just like I'm busier, but I'm not necessarily more productive. And I'm like, what's up with that? And I'm like, I have no like time to be creative. And as I kept going down that rabbit hole, I'm like, there's this bigger problem here, which is that, knowledge work is really about hiring people for their minds, and basically hooking them up to a screen and hoping something good happens. But in practice, the environment we're putting everybody in was like really out of sync with what they need cognitively. So meaning like, well, there's like this productivity and fulfillment problem, which is like, we know that we're most productive and we're most engaged and fulfilled when we have meaningful work, when we're in some kind of flow state, when we're well rested. And yet when we go to the office, if you want it, and especially when you look at your screen, if you wanted to put people in an environment that made it impossible to ever get into a flow state, that's like what we got. Like interrupt you, distract you, overwhelm you, the information overload. We are designing things like completely the wrong way. Like that was not a problem that seemed to be solving itself. And then as you scale these organizations, as the company gets bigger, it kind of gets slower and dumber. And so there's a big coordination problem that no one really seemed to be fixing. But mainly is this like disconnect between, we hire these people for their minds and then we like give them no space to think. And I'm like, why is no one working on this? And I was like, yeah, in every moonshot you care about, going to Mars, anything else, like it depends on, for the individual, like helping get their brain into something higher than first gear, and for an organization to be able to coordinate people in a way that just doesn't become where the company doesn't kind of fall over because of its lack of operational excellence. And I looked at like what I had to do to scale Dropbox. I'm like, God, like every company has to like roll their own way of doing like strategy and goals and planning and coordination. Otherwise, everybody's just stepping on each other's feet and the company sort of goes into stasis and bureaucracy. And I'm like, why is no one solving these problems? And things that were on the frontier, like these tools like Slack or others, I'm like, these are like not it. Like these are actually making the problems worse. Like they're just machines to, or they cause people to like spin each other's wheels, or they're giving individuals more and more powerful tools to basically distract 100 or 1,000 other people. And so I'm like, so it ended up being like, well, actually the mission of Dropbox is not to keep your files in sync. It's really to design in a more enlightened way of working, because the way we're working is like unenlightened, unexamined. The tools we're using sort of have accidentally lost the plot where, when you have like 10 tools or 100 tools, then, things might be okay. But as you go from like 100 to 1,000 tools, suddenly the tools have shifted from helping us do the work to becoming the work. And so it was like a systemic issue like that where I'm like, oh, I really can spend, my career or like working life trying to tackle that. And then second, like, yeah, you have to learn the craft. Well, part of it was like, oh, I need to have a mission that I'm really excited about. And yeah, this seems like the moonshot that enables all the other moonshots. And then secondly, I decided, I don't really look, my 18-year-old self would be like super excited about what I got going on right now. There's no reason to be upset about this. Like I'm choosing this life. It shouldn't be a burden. And then I decided that like being a CEO was like a craft that I could, study for my whole life, or that I could like develop my whole life. Is actually fortunate because in a lot of areas like sports or math or chess or something, like you kind of cap out biologically at some point and have to do something else. But a lot of the best CEOs, even at the end of their career, they feel like I'm only like just getting the hang of this. And so for me, it was getting through that middle inning was like finding like a really clearer sense of like an updated mission for myself and the company. And then also deciding that like, okay, winning for me is not necessarily how many commas are in an evaluation, because there's always going to be someone who's, beating you there. It's really about the craft of being a great CEO and learning and the love of the game. But, it's sort of easy to look at that in hindsight, but that was a pretty tough period to navigate when sort of everyone's coming after you. And then I had to level up a lot in terms of really understanding all the different disciplines and strategy and finance and how all these things fit together in competition. And what do you do? How do you fight off these incumbents? And so, that was a really important but tough formative period.
Isn't it funny how like you have these dreams of being in the double-digit CEO club and all these things, and then you like get to that reality, and all of a sudden you're like day to day starts to feel like a burden.
Yeah, totally.
Weird.
It's rough. It's rough graded on a curve. I think at some point every founder has to navigate this learning curve. And I think that's what separates the ones that make it to double digits from the ones that don't. Like, because how are you going to, I think you've sort of worked backwards. Like, how does the journey end? Like, either you voluntarily decide to step away, either by like selling the company or handing off the baton, or more commonly, the company like fails, or you get fired, or you burn out. And so it's like really about avoiding those things. And I think some of those most important lessons were around really, internalizing, okay, how do I keep, I think the single most important question for me was like, how do I keep my personal growth curve ahead of the company's growth curve? And to me, what that looked like, because everybody's doing every CEO is sort of learning on the job, every founder, every CEO. The hard part is figuring out like, what should I even be learning? Like, what does it even mean? Because in school, you get like a curriculum handed to you, but after you graduate, you're responsible for your own training and learning. Like, your coach isn't going to do that for you. Your board's not going to do that for you. Like, you really have to take responsibility for that. And to me, that meant like mapping out, like, all right, well, a year from now, 2 years from now, 5 years from now, what will I wish I had been learning today? And you think about that to-do list back in 2007, 2008, like, at the time we had like a prototype or maybe a beginning of a working product, but we didn't have users or we didn't have engineers. And to get engineers, we need to get money. And to get money, we'd have to learn how to fundraise. And so there's like, we write out that to-do list like 5 years from now, 2 years from now, 1 year from now. Then like working backwards, like how do you gain those skills, or like what experiences do you need? And navigating that for me looked like reading was probably the single most helpful thing, because like none of the challenges I mentioned are that unique to Dropbox. Like these are all sort of categorical challenges that every company faces. Certainly any tech company faces in that first 10 years. And then having that community, right? Having founders, some founders at the kind of same level. So your YC batch or whatever, you learn a lot from people going through the same thing at the same time. Also people who are like a year or two ahead, similar. You're like, oh, okay, that's how you have a successful Series A or whatever. Oh, that's how you get your first million users. And then you do learn things from people who are, 10, 20 years ahead. But often like the people who are way ahead, like actually don't have good tactical advice. So, and the older or further ahead people would get, the more like philosophical their answers would be. And so it's sort of this puzzle to try to integrate all that, all that feedback. And then you also have to look in the mirror and be like, all right, what, your company's culture or how it runs is a reflection of whatever the founder's personality is by default. So, figure out which of your weaknesses are crippling the company and try to fix it.
How many times do you think you've gotten close to selling the company?
I think there have been periods where there was interest in buying the company early on, but we really didn't want to sell.
How early?
2009-ish, like a couple years in. There were, any company that starts to get on some kind of J curve, some big growth curve, like will get inbound interest from all the usual suspects.
Including jobs?
Mm-hmm.
Okay.
Yeah, like Apple was interested. Eventually we got kicked up the chain up to Steve himself. Yeah. But at the same time, I'm like, it was interesting. It was very flattering. But I'm like, look, there's no reason we should sell right now, because Apple will still be here. All these companies will still be here. The reality is like, if you start falling off that growth curve, then, there's sort of a paradox where you only really get these offers if your company's doing
right.
well.
That's right.
And you don't get these offers if it's not. But I think the other part is like, there have also been periods where I'm like, man, this is like really hard, or it's like not fun,
like post
J
curve flattening.
Yeah. When things flatten out.
Like when Dropbox was trying to do different products. Yeah. Getting out of the first product.
Yeah. Well, interestingly, like, photo sharing is an example. We had a company called, we built a product called Carousel. We bought a company called Mailbox. And yeah, we got sort of, as we were moving up in the big leagues, then your opponents hit you a lot harder. So yeah, when Google launches Google Photos and it's like unlimited storage for life, and when they're, poaching, giving your employees like huge, multi-million-dollar comp packages, or doing the same to retain their own people, you're like, it is not a level playing field. And so, yeah, I had to, it was painful because I'm like, yeah, we built a great product experience in both of those cases, but, you get some painful lessons that just like innovating on the UI is not enough. Like that is not defensible. And so you get some pretty hard lessons around like, well, yeah, you have to build a good product experience, but you also have to get distribution. You have to get a working business model and unit economics. And then if you're lucky enough to do all those things, then you got to worry about defensibility and playing the chess move, or playing the game a couple moves ahead. And, we didn't really play the game enough moves ahead there. And so there's some painful and embarrassing lessons when we're like, that whole period was challenging, and that, the company was scaling, the competition was really intense and getting harder. We were fighting that multi-front war I was talking about. I was still trying to reconnect with a sense of purpose and why am I doing this to begin with? So all of that was tough. And then reading was actually pretty helpful. I reread Only the Paranoid Survive by Andy Grove, which talks about Intel going through the same kind of same kind of inflection point. And Andy Grove started out, he's a co-founder of Intel, started out as an engineer, eventually became CEO. And Intel, we all know, is the microprocessor company, but actually that's not where they started. They started out by making memory, like RAM, for computers. And they found, they had their own hypergrowth curve, but at some point they had similar things happening where suddenly they had all this competition from Japan that were making things better, faster, cheaper. And this dissonance where their sort of current numbers were all fine, but they were suddenly losing these key accounts, and just things were the matrix was glitching a little bit. And they're like, oh my God, this, we don't have to forecast that far ahead to recognize we have an existential problem. And the book is all about how they navigated that. And basically, there's this one scene where Andy and Gordon Moore are talking to each other. It's all right, if we were consultants to ourselves, what would we do? And they'd be like, well, we would get out of the memory business and put it all on this sketchy little microprocessor thing. But the hard part is that's saying Google saying, hey, we're just going to get out of search. Or for Dropbox saying we're going to get out of storage. And the advice Andy had for it, well, he talks about these strategic inflection points like this, and there's his whole kind of mental model of how to do this, which is very helpful to me. And he says, well, what you really got to do is put all your eggs in one basket, like the Mark Twain quote. And CEOs, you want optionality. You're going to want, you're going to have this inclination to try to keep spinning lots of different plates or hedge. But really, what you want to do is go all in on one thing. And so that's what we did. We're going to go all in on productivity, because unfortunately, that's where most of our subscribers are anyway, but that's really the defensible part of the business, is also the place where there's a lot of unsolved problems. Because, things like Carousel or Mailbox from a UI standpoint were innovative in that, the Carousel was the first app where you could have your whole life in your pocket and you weren't limited by the storage on your phone. But to say that Apple or Google would never have figured it out is a bit of a stretch. And so we're all right, let's make sure to next time solve problems that are not going to solve, that are not solving themselves. And so, these are all part of the, I think being in the big leagues is better than not being in the big leagues, but recognizing that each game you win in the playoffs, your reward is a harder opponent, and, and they'll flatten you, they're bigger and faster and will hit you a lot harder. So, and if you have any other attitude, and it's no, that's what I want. It's I want to perform at the highest level. If you see it as a burden, or you feel like a victim, you're not going to make it. And so I think there's this aspect of, you can't really control what happens to you. All you can control is really your response. And I think a critical part is your mindset of all right, instead of feeling burdened by this, or a victim, let me recognize that look, I would have, my 14-year-old self, 18-year-old self would be so stoked to be having these problems. And this is part of the game. It's actually has nothing to do with me. It's really just the dynamics of industries and so on. And, there's always a way through it. And there's plenty of companies that had way harder challenges than we did. So, and we have all the ingredients we need to be successful. So let me keep my head screwed on straight. And, learn how to metabolize the stress, and a lot of mindfulness and coaching and things like that to be able to power through this.
Metabolize the stress I like that expression. Figuring out ways to just literally endure.
Yeah. I think for me, it was lots of things. I think first is self-awareness. Because if you're not even, an awareness of what is happening in your head. which is kind of the subject of mindfulness to begin with, but I think it can often be kind of woo-woo or a little bit inaccessible, but just like being able to identify like what is sort of going on in the automatic dialogue in your head and, what's useful and what's not. And then second, I think the easiest way to start building some self-awareness is through coaching and getting feedback. And, my first experience of that was, you do a 360, you sit down with your coach, they walk you through some PowerPoint and they're like, and it's like, all right, Drew, here are your strengths. It's like, you're really creative. You love new ideas. I'm like, okay, this is good. You really love people. You really love like great relationships. You're really comfortable in ambiguity. And I'm like, this coaching thing's going great. All right, keep going. He's like, all right, well, now your development areas. You're really scattered and unreliable. You're conflict avoidant. You don't create structure, so people are like confused about what to do. And then my coach Rich Hagberg at the time, he put them together. He's like, look, these strengths are basically strengths and weaknesses are like the same side of the same coin, or like the two sides of the same coin. Where you love building good relationships with people, and then you don't like telling them things that make them unhappy, and so you avoid conflict or don't tell them the full truth. And so I think recognizing like, oh, okay, there's like a shadow side to all of my strengths, and then doing more formal versions of this where there's personality typing things. We've all heard of Myers-Briggs. My favorite is something called the Enneagram, which I think is like Myers-Briggs, but actually useful. But it's basically a personality typing system where you get a number from 1 through 9. And it's sort of like, there's like 9 different area codes of personality, like meaning like, not all people in the same, not all 3s are going to be the same, but they sort of have similar characteristics. But I had this experience of reading the book and being like, okay, I'm a 7. That's an enthusiast. There are lots of other types. A 3's an achiever. A 1's like a reformer, crusader. An 8's a challenger. So they have these different kind of archetypes. But I'm reading my chapter and I'm like, oh my God, I thought I was a special snowflake. I am not. Like, this exactly explains like what is going on in my head. So 7s are the enthusiasts. They like new ideas. They love people. They're like creative. They synthesize across different things, but like have very predictable weaknesses. Like, okay, which are the inverse of those things. So they're like tend to be kind of space cadets and FOMO driven. And so then, I had to like, you have this tension of like, all right, do I improve my strengths or do I like fix my weaknesses? And, I'll never be the most structured, the most like, checklisty guy. That's not the role I can or will play. But I do need to make sure I'm putting in like that I'm either like hiring people that complement there, or I'm like getting enough discipline to like not have those issues. But I think what that also does for you is you're like, I think, the more you can like depersonalize some of the stress, where it's like, look, it's not so much like me and the company.
Yeah,
it's
isn't
more
that
like
so much easier to say than do.
Yeah.
Like,
Totally.
Because a founder, like someone like you, probably feels like you can really influence and control your environment.
Yeah.
And so in some ways, you're like abdicating some sense of responsibility, which is very contrary to like what got you to here in the first place.
Yeah. Well, I think you can, you're sort of trying to like balance all these different ideas simultaneously. It's like, yes, you do have, you're not like, oh, I don't have, you're like, yeah, I'm responsible. Like and like not only, and I'm responsible for, if you're CEO, you're responsible for everything. And, saying, oh, my team did, you don't really get anyone else to point to, especially if you like created the company from nothing. Like there's no other guy. You can't like be like, blame the last guy. So everything happened on your watch and is your responsibility, and you're sort of the cleanup guy. So if there's a problem, you have to fix it. But at the same time, there's a big difference between like, oh my God, I am failing versus, these are the challenges that companies at our scale tend to have. And these are the challenges that someone with my personality type is going to tend to have. And like, it's not a game, but if I can look at it sort of more like a game, is where it's like not so, what you want to do is like unfuse your identity from the company. And recognize like, look, these are, I tend to, I'm like playing a role right now, but I'm not like the company. I'm not, we need to be like slow down the tape of all these things I'm saying in my head and like recognize that like, okay, this is, you don't have to take it all so personally or, you know, you don't have to be so emotional about it. I mean, look, it's easy to just say in hindsight. At the time, it was like mostly just like stressful and painful. And you know, you have thousands of people looking at you or whatever, like saying like, hey, how are we going to get out of all these problems? Or like, okay, cool, we're shutting down these apps. Like, God, I understand what we're not going to do. What are we going to do? And you're thinking to yourself, like, if I knew the answer to that question, like, we wouldn't be having this problem right now. And so, yeah, it's you know, it's all in the game.
It must be very eye-opening to sit on. You've been on Meta's board for 5 years,
yeah.
Which is a very interesting 5 years.
Totally.
I don't know. It's got to just.
Oh, it's super cool. Yeah, it's been an amazing learning experience, and Mark's an incredible leader. And I mean, we've been friends for a long time, but then to also, you know, see him operate or in terms of running the company up close has been an awesome experience.
When you like, I imagine you've like been to his place in Tahoe or whatever, and you like when you go up there and you like sit with him, or you go to his place in Palo, it doesn't matter.
Yeah,
you go sit with him. What are the things that you're like? What are you trying to dig at? Like, what are you trying to learn?
Sure, I mean, it's a lot of what we've talked about. Like, you know, how do you navigate this kind of competitive landscape? How do you scale this within your company? How do you deal with this kind of problem? You know,
and when you ask for advice, are you asking for tactical advice or are you asking for frameworks?
Sometimes it depends. I think, I mean, often it'll feel tactical, like here's a specific thing, you know, we're trying to navigate. But, you know, often it's in those, and sometimes it's in those like group conversations where it's like a bunch of founders all talking about, oh yeah, we had that issue too. Oh yeah, here's what we did about it. But, you know, there's some saying like, you know, art critics talk about the art, but then like artists talk about where to get cheap turpentine. So I think it is actually a lot of like tactical, like, oh yeah. How do you, okay, if you don't do one-on-ones, and how do you stay in touch with your full team? Oh, okay. Yeah. So I think it's a lot of comparing notes on that kind of stuff.
Yeah, that makes sense.
But I'd say the nature of the problems aren't that different. Like, you know, how do you scale the company? How do you get the right talent? How do you deal with competition? How do you keep evolving the products? I mean, these are pretty, you reach some break point of scale where it's, you know, there's a surprising amount of commonality in the challenges too.
And like, is your current plan to go forever? Like, you want to be the CEO of Dropbox and get better as the CEO of Dropbox until?
I mean, we've talked mostly about like painful experiences, but you know, then there's been this new chapter, which has been really exciting when you get to the other side of it, where the learning curve eventually does flatten out somewhat. You're not so overwhelmed by all of these things. But I think the biggest thing that happened was just the new era in computing that we're all part of, which is, you know, the rise of machine intelligence. Suddenly, I'd say in the late innings of the last season, or towards the end of the last season, like, you know, end of the SaaS boom, but before Gen AI, like, yeah, it did feel a little bit stifling. Like, yeah, like we have this core product. It's not really evolving that much. There's a bunch of stuff to clean up within the company, but, you know, at the end of the day, we're sort of a single product SaaS company that's on the one hand, a multi-billion-dollar scale and very profitable. And there's a lot we're proud of, but at the same time, it's not like a new continent of people who haven't heard of Dropbox or like don't know where their files are going to be synced like this. It's kind of a fixed, you know, the landscape isn't changing very much, and we're competing against, you know, Google Drive or OneDrive or whatever the free thing is in the productivity suite. So you sort of feel a little bit hemmed in. But then Gen AI comes along and it's like, oh yeah, there's like completely like at the scoreboard reset, like everybody's win-loss is back at 0-0, and there's all these paths forward with the product that just we didn't have before, or stuff that I was like excited about building, you know, 10 years ago, but couldn't because, yeah, computers couldn't understand text. And so that's really been the biggest source of motivation for me. Is, you know, I'm first and foremost, I grew up as like a little kid coding with, you know, I was like a 3 years old, and my parents had like a PC Junior in the living room, and I wrote my first line of code when I was like 5. So like that's my first love, and so I really love the technology of deep learning and AI, and like building GPU servers and going down to the tensor level with the math and understanding what's really going on, or profiling CUDA kernels. Like that's like my happy place still. And so in the last couple of years, this has really been for me. I'm like, people are like, oh, what do you do for fun? And I'm like, honestly, like I like coding and prototyping. That's like what I spend more time doing other than family and work stuff. Like that's it, because it's like so interesting.
You think you still got your fastball to win the hackathon?
I think so. Yeah.
You think you could win it?
Yeah. I mean, I could definitely hold my own. Yeah, absolutely.
Are you still committing code to the code base?
Not production.
Why?
But prototyping. Because
you need more context needed.
Yeah. Well, I mean, even in 2009, I had to kind of hang up my skates.
Which was what, like 2 years in?
2 years in, not because I couldn't write the code, but because I couldn't maintain it, and I become a bottleneck. And so, like, if they'd be like, "Oh yeah, Drew, like, there's some bug in your thing," and I'd be like, "I'm sorry, I'm going to be like on the East Coast for a week, like talking to customers or investors or whatever." Like, you just end up being this. I really needed to delegate that fully. But I think like that prototyping has been a huge part of like how I think about what we should do next, and just like what I get really excited about. So, I started out as an engineer. I knew I wanted to be a founder. Wasn't totally sure I wanted to be CEO. Backed into that. Liked it more than I thought. But I'm like, man, there's a lot of tedious shit that you have to do. And then I'm like, all right, the same way I was like annoyed by forgetting my thumb drive, I'm like annoyed by all these like repetitive tasks. And I'm like, man, we need some automation in here. And by the way, I'd really love to learn, machine learning in a rigorous way, starting like 10 years ago. And then I'm like, all right, I'm write all those scripts to automate little pieces of this. And then those are often like little fragments that evolve or become product ideas. And even with, so Dropbox, I mean, as you'd imagine, I thought a lot about, even before Gen AI, like, all right, if I were to start Dropbox over again, what would I build? It turned out like a lot of things would be similar. Like there are these I started Dropbox because I kept forgetting my thumb drive, but really the bigger problem the bigger frustrations are like, why is it so hard to like find my stuff and organize my stuff and share my stuff and protect my stuff? And back then, in the beginning, 2007, my stuff was my files, and the scattering was across like these devices and operating systems that didn't talk to each other. But fast forward to today, or even 5 years ago, and we're sort of back to a lot of the same problems. Like it's search. It's like at home, I have one search box. I can Google all of human knowledge from one place. And then I go to work, I've got 10 different search boxes that each search 10% of my stuff. There's like no question for which that's the right answer. That's also this thing that's been going the wrong direction for like a decade or two. 20 years ago, enterprise search was not actually that big a deal. Like if you wanted to find something, it was either on your hard drive or was in your inbox, but you didn't have that many places to look. But now you run 3 searches, you give up, you Slack someone, turn them into a search engine for you. And I'm just like, why is it like this? But it's not just search. Like even the concept of organizing or being organized or organizing your stuff. Like what does that mean when half of it is in Google Docs and half is in Dropbox or whatever percentage? Like it's all just scattered across these different apps. There's, if you're remodeling your house, if you're getting ready for a board meeting, what do you do if you have a Google Doc and a 10 gig 4K video in Dropbox and an Airtable link? Like there's no common container for these things. And it's like, what's up with that? And then even just the idea of like picking up where you left off. Like when you go to sleep and wake up, your papers are still on your desk where you left them. When you reboot your computer, your files are still there. But in browser land, like when you close Chrome, like it takes your entire workspace with it. You like start over, or like more commonly, you just declare tab bankruptcy and you're like, F this, I'm starting over. But imagine if your computer like hid all your files every time you rebooted it. You'd be like, that's a broken computer. But this is like the state of the art we all live with. And you just look at that experience. When you look at the consumer landscape, like that actually has gotten a lot better. Like it started out very fragmented. Linear TV actually had some of this. Like in the beginning, 10 channels, Saturday morning cartoons, TV's fine. Go to basic cable, 30 channels, 100 channels, it's fine. go to 1,000 channels and you're like, what the hell is going on? Like, I just want to watch the Super Bowl. Why am I paging through all this like music I've never gonna listen to? And why are there 3 versions of the same channel? And it just like the experience lost the plot, but then found it again once you had things like, things like what we needed was not actually yet another 1,000 channels. We needed like a rethink of the whole system. So we needed, not Comcast was just like, we're just giving people what they're asking for. They just want more stuff. But what we really needed was Netflix, or like a redesign of that whole system where, when you go into Netflix, but now like YouTube or Spotify or anything, they don't show you like 15 million things starting with A. It's like this auto-curated learning experience that's like designed to give you access to all 10 million things, but by default gives you just like this auto-curated set of good options. And then when you choose to watch Drive to Survive versus Squid Game or vice versa, the system just, you're not filing anything away. It just like learns and presents you better options the next time you log in. And so you look at that consumer content experience and you're like, yeah, of course, that's how everything works. And then you go to work and it's like none of that has been ported over. And it's like, well, what do we have instead? Well, what do we have? We have, files didn't go away. Still have files, but we have this like file browser that's like 40 years old that hasn't really changed since like the original Mac. And then on the other side of our screen, we have that Chrome, a Chrome browser with so many tabs open, you can't even see text anymore. There's like no good, that experience has like not evolved in a long time. And then especially with AI, like you would make a bunch of different product decisions. And so that's, that, especially towards the end of last season, that's the problem I started really getting excited about. And I was, coming back to the prototyping, I was like, man, I'm just these like this deep learning and these semantic search or fuzzy search is becoming a thing. And I was writing like little toy apps to build like a personal search engine. I was like, holy shit, this like works super well. It's super fast. You don't have to worry about whether you called the document, whether you search for like strategy or plan or whatever, it'll just find it. And I'm like, oh my God, and it returns results as fast as you can type. I'm like, oh my God, everybody's going to have, a billion knowledge workers are going to have this experience pretty soon. And like, no one has built it. So I think I both get like easily personally frustrated by things, intersect like by problems with technology. Plus I love like prototyping stuff myself to get a sense of where the tech, is it too early to, or is the technology ready yet? And then that really drives a lot of my conviction about where to invest. And so, that was maybe 2021 when I was playing with that, but then we bought a company called Command E to really bootstrap that. And then we have a new product called Dropbox Dash, which really aims to like reimagine how you find and organize and share content. Gives you universal search and answers within your company. It will organize stuff across platforms.
It's interesting. This is becoming the new like battleground that used to be, maybe storage and other things collaboration that you used to compete on.
Yeah.
This is like the next battleground.
Yeah.
Like you saw Perplexity announce something to do something in this space.
Yep.
Obviously you all did.
Glean.
Yeah. We were the Series A of Glean.
Sure.
So like it is becoming a very huge and obvious market.
Yeah. It's one of the few like non-disappointing areas of AI.
Yeah. That's well said.
You have coding, you have support, you have a lot of enterprise search or whatever this category is even morphing into. I think everybody's come at it from a little bit of a different angle.
Yeah.
I think a lot of companies are interested in like, how do you build the omnipotent work assistants, and search might be part of that. But that's sort of a category. And then, from my perspective, we want to build agentic things too, but like, Microsoft and Google are going to throw infinite resources at that problem. So you have to, there's a bit of, one thing I've learned is like, there's a bit of a balancing act. Like, you want to go for the most like ambitious and exciting thing. That said, if you also have to be careful about going at the thing where everybody's aimed their guns. And so you have to get maybe a little bit outside of the blast radius.
You mean similar to like the browser agents right now? Yeah.
Totally. And, I think that maybe there are, I don't think there's a lot of great things about getting older or seeing 18 years of stuff, but you do start to get some perspective on cycles and you get to, and then even if you don't have that much experience, I could read about Andy Grove and Intel without having to live in the 70s. And so studying what happened with Netscape versus Internet Explorer, or what happened with MySpace versus Facebook, or what happened, there's all these lessons you can draw from the past that are really helpful for forecasting the future. Or that's often where my head goes to begin with, is like, all right, well, nobody knows what's going on in AI. Oh my God, there's all these different theories about what's going to happen. But I think it's really helpful to try to distinguish the things that are timeless from the things that change. And I think a lot of the great like business thinking and human nature is not going to change. And so distinguishing, what's fashion on one end of the spectrum versus like, these are fundamentals that are not going to change about human motivation or human nature. And so it does get a little more like philosophical as you get more tenured. But I find that to be the most like grounding, like looking at history, thinking from first principles, playing hands-on with the technology that helps as grounding for otherwise what seems like a totally chaotic and illegible situation.
Totally. Well, I appreciate you doing this. I can't wait to see how things play out.
Yeah.
Like, I feel like I live in this dichotomous universe where on the one hand, I'm talking to many of the companies that are in the double digits club.
Yeah.
And then on the other hand, I'm like talking to, like the Harvey founders and, like people that are in the like, right?
In it, like in the deep in the first chapter. Yeah.
Brett Taylor, who's maybe oscillating between both, like right on the edge of, the new, and seeing them reconcile with basically like not knowing what they don't know. And then folks like you reconciling with the inverse of that, which is like, all right, the world is changing and how do I adapt? It's really interesting.
Yeah. Well, and it's an evolution. For me personally, it was like, being the hyperscaling founder, and then you have to professionalize the company and scale it up financially. But then you have like a stagnation period that you have to like, and then you have to come back in and be a change agent and blow it up and go 0 to 1 again. So, and then do that within the context of, an 18-year-old company.
Totally.
I want early on, I was like, I really want a job where the learning curve is always high. And I was like, careful what you wish for. That's certainly what I got.
I think you found it.
But I think, that was one of the big surprises. Like one thing with all of the double-digit tenured founders is like, they do it for the love of the game. And the reason people keep doing it is really that more and the impact you can have. I still never get tired of hearing someone's story about Dropbox, and I'll never stop like looking over someone's shoulder at a Starbucks on their laptop to see if they have the little box on the menu bar. And AI gives us, and one great thing about tech is like the scoreboard resets every time there's a new era of computing, and that's like when the most exciting things happen. And you get all these new colors to paint with, and unfortunately with technology, there's for every problem it solves, it creates a new one. Maybe that's part of why it's a good business.
That's right. That's true. Along with maybe some good margins along the way.
Yeah. So, but it's certainly delivered as far as the never a dull moment.
No doubt.
A lot of stuff to learn.
I ask all guests the same question. First, are you hiring?
We sure are. Yep.
Any key roles, any locations, I guess non-locations in your case?
Yeah, so we're 90%, we have this virtual first working model where we're like 90% remote, but we really care about that last 10%. So for example, we're doing our hack week in person this week. And we're hiring across the board. I mean, certainly as you'd imagine, a lot of AI talent and, early stage product development. But so always looking for great people there. And then we're also like trying to make distributed or remote work productive. So I think there's kind of a holy war going on out there where people are like, oh, should we go back to the office? Should we be remote? I think it's mostly people talking past each other. I think at some level, forcing people back into the office might be like trying to force customers back into movie theaters or malls. It's not like the movie theater is a bad thing. It's just like configured for a different world. I mean, if you're a startup, if you can fit everybody in a room, you should fit everybody in a room. But once you get to a certain scale, you're going to be distributed whether you want to be or not. But like, we were sort of forced into distributed work after COVID. But if you look at how we made the PC productive at work or how we made the internet productive at work, it took a lot more than like, going to Fry's or CompUSA and just like plugging in a computer. You had to like really rethink the nature of work and all the workflows and business process. And we believe the same thing. I think there's just missing scaffolding for distributed work. Like, how do we make that environment more productive? And Dash is a good example of what that can look like. How do we reduce some of the distraction? How do we create like a calmer, more focused working environment? How do we fend off some of the distraction and overload? Dash is a good example of many future things that we're going to do on that dimension. But yeah, we're always hiring for great people.
When you hear the word grit, what do you think of?
I think of, in short, I think it's like learning to run towards discomfort when you want to run away from it. Like the discomfort never goes away, but your ability to like manage it and confront it gets better if you exercise. It's sort of like a muscle you can exercise. And so, I talked a lot about like learning and keeping your growth curve like ahead of the company's growth curve. There's a lot you can do with the like book learning side of that. That tends to be pretty fun, pretty easy. I think what's harder is like confronting how your personality is crippling the company, or really how it's easy to blame a big company for copying your stuff when it's really like actually stuff that you did that you need to learn from, and really the only mistake is making the same mistake twice. But when people, especially the higher achiever you are growing up, or the more you've like been labeled that, the more brittle you tend to be, and the more you like get obsessed with not being wrong. And so learning when things go wrong, your instinct will be to like run away from it or sort of rationalize it, or you'll be embarrassed or threatened by it. But I think the hard part is learning to like slow down and be like, and take a microscope to whatever happened and your role in it, which is often like painful and embarrassing, but then you actually can do something about it and don't have that problem next time. And I think all of the great founders like have learned how to do that. But I think the hard part is, it's easy to describe. It's like very painful and embarrassing to go through these moments where like you've really drove the company into a ditch, or like, you recognize that you played a major, or like to shift from like blaming other circumstances or dismissing things to like really internalizing, oh yeah, this was some tough feedback from my team, or something, that I decided that really didn't go right, and learning to like not beat yourself up over it either. Just learn from it and get better. But that's like, and I think that's such an important part of the learning rate is like the degree to which you're willing to like stop and really scrutinize your role in things. And then also, but not be so paralyzed by feeling bad about it. And learning to just be like, okay, yeah, that happened. And, here's what happened. Here's how I'm going to handle that differently and move on. But I think that's like very emotionally hard to do.
Great answer. Drew, thank you.
Yeah. Thanks for having me.
That's it for now. If you liked the episode, please leave us a review or go back into the archives where we've done more than 200 episodes with some fantastic folks. This podcast is a Kleiner Perkins production, and I'm Joubin. Thanks for listening.